December 22nd, 2007. A young couple and their 6-year-old triplets left a holiday resort in Washington state. They never made it home. Their silver minivan was last seen on a foggy mountain road near Lake Chelan. After that, nothing. No calls, no witnesses. No signs of an accident. An entire family gone in a single night. For 13 years, the case haunted investigators. Some believed they had driven into the lake. Others suspected foul play. But with no car, no bodies, and no evidence, the Parker family became one of Washington's coldest cold cases. In 2020, a diver scanning the lake floor with sonar made a shocking discovery. A sunken minivan buried under layers of mud. Inside, the skeletal remains of 5 people. Forensic tests revealed they hadn't drowned. They had been executed, each one shot before the vehicle was pushed into the water. The evidence pointed to one man, a man with a motive, a history of threats, and a debt that had turned deadly. 13 years after the Parkers vanished, justice finally caught up with their killer. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries. Like this video and leave a comment to let us know what you think about the Parker case. Daniel Parker was 33 years old. He worked as an IT engineer at a small software company in Seattle. Colleagues described him as quiet, reliable, and serious about his work. He wasn't ambitious about climbing the corporate ladder. His focus was always on his family. Daniel earned enough to keep the household running, but his salary was stretched thin. Raising 3 children at once meant endless bills: food, clothes, school, medical care. He tried to make things better. At one point, he attempted to launch his own tech business. The plan failed, leaving him with personal debt he could not manage. Despite his struggles, Daniel was devoted to his family. Friends said he rarely complained. He preferred to avoid conflict. At home, he wanted to be the steady hand, the dependable father. He never gave the impression of someone who would run away from responsibility. That fact would later become important when investigators weighed the possibility of voluntary disappearance. But debt had consequences. Daniel owed $40,000 to a man named Mark Hollis. Hollis was not a banker or an institution. He was a local loan provider with a reputation for threats and intimidation. This relationship would become the dark cloud hanging over the Parker family. Rebecca Parker was 31. She worked as a preschool teacher. Everyone remembered her as warm, gentle, and patient. Parents trusted her with their children. Kids adored her. She smiled easily, even when life was hard. Rebecca was the emotional core of the Parker household. She balanced Daniel's quiet seriousness with kindness and energy. She held the family together during difficult times. She was the one organizing school activities, church events, and community gatherings. Neighbors said she made friends easily and was always willing to help. She kept a diary, notebooks filled with daily notes about the children, small details about family life, and her hopes for the future. Those diaries later became part of how friends and the 3 children often dressed alike. Rebecca liked to put them in matching jackets or sweaters. It became their trademark look. When the Parkers walked into a community event, people smiled immediately at the sight of the triplets. The media would later call them simply the triplets. When the family disappeared, those 3 children became the symbol of the tragedy. Their young age, their shared identity as siblings born together, made the case especially painful for the public to absorb. Neighbors described the Parkers as the model family of their Seattle neighborhood. No crime, no scandal, no history of running away. Outwardly, they looked like the picture of stability and happiness. Daniel working hard, Rebecca caring for the children, the triplets lighting up every room. But behind closed doors there were cracks. Financial pressure built up year after year. Daniel's debt to Mark Hollis was not just a number on paper. Hollis had shown up at the Parker house in person. Neighbors overheard shouting. They heard Hollis threatening Daniel. Some recalled hearing Rebecca pleading for calm. These confrontations spread fear. Friends worried that something terrible could happen. But most assumed it was bluster, just another dispute that would eventually resolve. No one believed it would lead to a tragedy of this scale. When the Parkers vanished in December 2007, these details, the debt, the arguments, the reputation of Hollis, rose to the surface. Investigators immediately asked, did the family run away? Did they crash by accident? Or did someone make sure they never came back? The Parkers were not people who vanished voluntarily. Daniel had flaws, but he had a reputation for standing by his family. Rebecca was deeply rooted in her community. She had no reason to disappear. And the triplets, only 6 years old, had their lives ahead of them. The contrast was sharp. Outwardly a happy and admired family. On December 22, 2007, the Parker family finished their short winter holiday at a resort near Hood River. It was supposed to be an ordinary trip just before Christmas. They had spent the weekend resting, eating together, and watching their 3 children play in the snow. At 9:10 p.m., the family left the restaurant at the resort. The memory of that moment stayed with one of the waiters. He remembered them clearly. Daniel Parker signed the bill, thanked the staff, and wished them a Merry Christmas. Rebecca gathered a small bag filled with toys to keep the triplets calm during the drive. The 3 children wore thick jackets, almost identical, their cheeks red from the cold. The waiter later told investigators that nothing seemed unusual. The family looked happy, calm, and relaxed. There was no sign of stress or conflict. No one in the restaurant that night would have guessed that this was the last time anyone would see the Parkers alive. Their silver minivan pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the narrow road that led toward Lake Chelan. At 9:30 p.m., a traffic camera captured the vehicle at the start of the mountain road. The image was blurred by fog, but the license plate was visible. This was the final confirmed sighting of the Parker family. After that moment, nothing. No more cameras. No more images. No more witnesses who could place the family along the road. The technology in 2007 was limited. Cameras were few and far between. That gap left investigators blind to what happened next. The road itself was dangerous. Lake Chelan is long, narrow, and deep. The road ran alongside the lake, twisting through the mountains. At night, with heavy fog, visibility could drop to just a few feet. Drivers often described the route as nerve-wracking, even during daylight. At night, with winter conditions, it was worse. That night, the fog was thick. At first, people thought it might have been a coverage problem. In 2007, cell reception around the mountains and lakes was patchy, but the timing looked suspicious. All phones cutting off within minutes suggested more than just bad service. It suggested someone had switched them off. By the next morning, worry turned into alarm. The Parkers did not arrive at Sunday church service, even though they had told friends they would be there. They did not return home. They did not answer any calls. Family members contacted police to report them missing. Investigators quickly mapped out the last confirmed movements. They left the resort at 9:10 p.m. The camera caught them at 9:30 p.m. Their route home was limited. To get back to Seattle, they had to pass along the lakeside road. There was no alternative. That was where investigators focused. Police units drove the stretch of road multiple times. They searched the shoulders, the bends, the areas where the road came closest to the lake. They expected to see skid marks, broken guardrails, or signs of a crash. But the surface of the road looked untouched. The grass and dirt along the roadside showed no disturbance, no tracks, no fresh tire impressions, no broken branches. Even the water of the lake showed no evidence. If a vehicle had gone in, there should have been an oil sheen, floating debris, or broken glass washed against the rocks. There was nothing. It was as if the Parker minivan had never driven down that road at all. Investigators began canvassing for witnesses. One truck driver who had passed through the area shortly after 10 p.m. said he saw nothing. The road was empty. The fog was heavy. He remembered the silence and the stillness, but nothing else. Another resident living near the lakeshore reported hearing a loud engine around 9:45 p.m., but he admitted he couldn't see through the fog, and he didn't hear any crash, screaming, or metal breaking, just the sound of a motor echoing in the cold night. The possibility of a voluntary disappearance was considered, but detectives quickly dismissed it. The Parkers had not taken luggage. Their bank accounts remained untouched. There was no activity on their credit cards. They had left behind a fully decorated home with wrapped Christmas presents under the tree. Nothing suggested they had planned to vanish. That left two main options: an accident that left no trace, or foul play. The silence of the phones pushed suspicion toward foul play. If the family had simply crashed into the water, at least one device might have tried to connect before dying. The complete blackout suggested deliberate action. The community felt the shock immediately. Posters with the children's faces appeared within days. The press picked up the story, focusing on the tragedy of 3 6-year-old triplets missing with their parents. The headline, "5 Missing in Lake Chelan," spread across Washington state. Neighbors organized candlelight vigils. Parents held their own children closer. The disappearance of a family known for being loving and ordinary was a nightmare scenario. But in those first days, the reality was clear. The Parker family had left a resort at 9:10. Their minivan had been seen on a camera at 9:30. After that, there was only silence. No distress call. No witnesses to a crash. No physical evidence on the road. No signs of life after 9:30 p.m. It was a perfect void. This was the night the Parkers vanished. A night that marked the beginning of one of the most haunting cold cases in Washington state. December 23, 2007. The morning after the Parkers vanished. Police from Chelan County mobilized quickly. The case wasn't treated like a routine missing persons call. This was an entire family of 5 gone without a trace. A minivan, a father, a mother, and 3 6-year-old triplets. The urgency was immediate. Officers drove to the stretch of highway where the traffic camera had last captured the silver minivan. That was 9:30 p.m. the night before. The camera showed Daniel at the wheel, headlights cutting through heavy fog, the family bundled in winter coats. After that, silence. The search team walked the road slowly. They examined every curve, every guardrail, every slope that dropped off toward the water. They expected the obvious: skid marks, tire grooves, a dent in the barrier, shattered glass. But there was nothing. The pavement was smooth, no brake marks, no scratches or gouges. The grass on the shoulder lay flat and untouched, no broken plastic, no fragments of metal, no oil sheen spreading across the lake. It was as if the minivan had never passed that point. Investigators wrote in their first field report that the site was too clean. If this had been an accident, there should have been something, some trace of impact or evidence of the car leaving the roadway. But the road offered nothing. Police widened their search. They brought in more units, spread out along both directions of the road, walking for miles, shining flashlights into ravines and tree lines. They extended the search 5 miles north and south of the camera location. Still nothing. No tracks, no disturbed soil, no signs of a crash. The Parker family had vanished in a 30-minute window, on a road that should have left evidence. Police turned to the last unknown interactions. The restaurant staff remembered the Parkers leaving the lodge at 9:10 p.m. Daniel had signed the bill. Rebecca had gathered the kids' coats and a bag of toys. Everyone described them as cheerful, calm, and in good spirits. The traffic camera confirmed the car heading toward Lake Chelan at 9:30. That was the final proof that the family made it onto the mountain road. After that, only vague witness accounts. A truck driver told officers that after 10 p.m. the road was silent. By the third day, the story had spread across Washington state. Posters with photos of Sophie, Ethan, and Lucas, 3 identical 6-year-olds, were plastered across Seattle, Spokane, and Wenatchee. The triplets drew national attention. The missing poster showed them side by side in matching winter coats. Their disappearance triggered a wave of sympathy that few cases ever did. Television anchors highlighted the case night after night. The Seattle Times ran the headline, "5 Missing in Lake Chelan." National news outlets soon followed. Police held press conferences but could not give solid answers. They admitted the investigation was top priority. They admitted there were no leads. Each day without news increased the pressure. Reporters demanded to know if foul play was suspected. Parents demanded to know if roads around Chelan were safe. Activists demanded to know if local police had the resources to handle the search. Meanwhile, candlelight vigils began in Seattle, where Rebecca had taught preschool. Families who had known her children came together in prayer. Pastors urged the community to keep faith. The phrase, "the missing triplets case," was repeated again and again. The family became a symbol of injustice. The more time passed without evidence, the harsher the criticism toward investigators became. As the story gained national attention, Daniel Parker's financial troubles came into focus. Police discovered the $40,000 debt. It wasn't owed to a bank. It wasn't an official loan. It was borrowed from a man named Mark Hollis, a man with a reputation. Neighbors said Hollis was short-tempered, aggressive, and had no patience when it came to money. Neighbors also remembered hearing heated arguments outside the Parker home. Hollis had visited more than once, pounding on the door demanding repayment. One neighbor testified that Hollis shouted he would take back what's mine one way or another. That history immediately put Hollis on the radar. Detectives brought him in for questioning. Investigators expanded their approach. If the family had left voluntarily, there should have been financial activity. But their bank accounts remained untouched. No withdrawals, no credit card purchases, no new loans. The family's cell phones all shut down at the same time. Records showed they went dark between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m., the exact window of the disappearance. That detail was chilling. Phones don't simply die in unison unless turned off or destroyed. Police considered kidnapping, but there were no ransom demands, no phone calls, no letters, no suspicious emails. They considered voluntary flight, but the Parkers had not withdrawn savings. They had not packed bags. They had made plans for the holiday. Rebecca had confirmed Christmas parties at her preschool. Daniel had a project due at work. Nothing suggested they intended to run. The FBI joined the investigation. Federal agents reviewed every file the Parkers were connected to: employment, education, church groups, community ties. They checked for anyone who might have reason to target them. Again, everything circled back to Mark Hollis. But the circle had no edges, no direct line to prove guilt. The family's minivan remained the missing piece. Without the car, police had nothing concrete. Months dragged on. Dive teams searched sections of the lake, but the water was freezing, the floor was muddy, and visibility was near zero. Sonar technology at the time was limited. Divers surfaced with nothing but frustration. No tire tracks were found on nearby dirt roads. No one reported abandoned vehicles matching the Parkers' van. Leads poured in, but went nowhere. A tip suggested the family crossed into Canada. Border agents confirmed no such crossing. Another tip suggested they were hiding in Oregon. That too was dismissed. The case became an unsolvable puzzle. Theories swirled in the press. Some insisted the Parkers drove off the road into the lake. Others whispered they were kidnapped. The disappearance of the Parker family was no longer just another missing persons case. It had escalated into one of the most intense manhunts Washington state had ever seen. In the first week after the family vanished, police knew they couldn't waste time. More than 100 people were deployed: local deputies, state troopers, volunteer search teams, even trained rescue specialists. The Chelan County Sheriff's Office shut down stretches of the lakeside road to scan every inch. Officers lined up shoulder to shoulder, combing through ditches, pulling back brush, and peering over the steep drop-offs into the water below. Cadaver dogs were brought in, their handlers hoping they might pick up a scent leading to the minivan or the family. But the dogs found nothing. No trace of human remains. No scent trail leaving the highway. To investigators, this was deeply unsettling. If a car had crashed, or if people had exited the vehicle near the road, the dogs should have found something. Instead, there was silence. From the ground, the search moved to the air. Police helicopters and aircraft from the Washington State Patrol made repeated sweeps along the shoreline. Their high-powered spotlights cut through the fog and reflected off the cold surface of Lake Chelan. Pilots circled for hours, sometimes flying so low that residents said their windows rattled. But nothing surfaced. No tire marks leading into the lake. No oil slick drifting on the water. Not even the faintest sign of a van that could have plunged below. The natural next step was underwater. Dive teams entered the lake, braving near-freezing temperatures and zero visibility. Divers dropped into sections where the road ran closest to the water, groping along the lakebed for metal or glass. But Lake Chelan is one of the deepest lakes in North America, plunging over 1,400 feet in some areas. In the targeted sections, depths still exceeded 400 feet. Meanwhile, investigators turned to the family's financial and personal life. They traced every bank account, credit card, and insurance policy. None of them showed activity after December 22, 2007. There were no suspicious withdrawals, no purchases, no signs that the Parkers had prepared to flee. Their mortgage remained unpaid after the disappearance. Their utility bills continued to arrive in the mail. Everything suggested they had expected to come home that night. Detectives quickly ruled out the idea of a voluntary disappearance. Daniel Parker had shown up to work without fail before the family trip. His wife Rebecca had scheduled Christmas activities with her preschool class. Neighbors recalled how the children had been excited to open presents under their own tree. In the Parker home, unopened gifts still sat wrapped, waiting for Christmas morning. These were not the actions of a family planning to run. Another theory gained traction: abduction. Perhaps the Parkers had been forced off the road at gunpoint. Perhaps another vehicle had blocked their path and taken control of them. But that theory unraveled just as quickly. In most kidnappings, there is a ransom demand, a phone call, a letter, some kind of communication. But in this case, nothing came. No demand for money, no anonymous threats, just silence. As days stretched into weeks, the case began dominating headlines. Newspapers in Seattle and Spokane splashed the Parker family photos across their front pages. National news outlets soon followed. The faces of Sophie, Ethan, and Lucas, 3 6-year-old triplets, appeared on evening news broadcasts across the country. Anchors called it the missing triplets case, and the phrase stuck. Parents across America watched, horrified by the idea that an entire family could vanish into the fog without explanation. The public pressure on law enforcement was enormous. Every press briefing was packed with reporters. Hollis was interrogated again, this time by federal agents. He repeated the same alibi. He had been home alone that night. He had no one to confirm his story, but there was also nothing directly tying him to the scene. No cell phone records placing him near Chelan. No camera footage. No witnesses who saw his car on the road. Without hard evidence, investigators couldn't hold him. They had to let him walk away. Weeks passed. Each new search brought the same result. Nothing. No second crime scene. No body. No car. No ransom. No clue. Detectives chased down dozens of tips. Someone claimed to have seen a silver van at a gas station in Idaho. Another thought they saw Rebecca in a shopping center in Oregon. Each lead was checked. Each turned up false. The longer the silence lasted, the more the case slipped into uncertainty. Officers who had been working 18-hour days began to burn out. Helicopters were grounded to save costs. Dive teams were recalled. Volunteers returned to their lives, no longer able to devote time to a search that yielded nothing. By the end of January 2008, investigators faced a grim reality. They had exhausted every immediate lead. There were no signs of accident, no signs of foul play that could be proven, and no indication of where the family had gone. Despite the largest mobilization of resources Chelan County had ever seen, the Parkers had simply vanished. On February 1st, the sheriff's office announced that the search would scale back. A small team of detectives would remain assigned, but the massive daily manhunt was over. The case would officially move into cold case status. The announcement stunned the community. People who had gathered for weeks to hold vigils now expressed anger and disbelief. How could a family disappear when helicopters, divers, dogs, and hundreds of officers had searched? Hollis was interrogated again, this time by federal agents. He repeated the same alibi. He had been home alone that night. He had no one to confirm his story, but there was also nothing directly tying him to the scene. No cell phone records placing him near Chelan. No camera footage. No witnesses who saw his car on the road. Without hard evidence, investigators couldn't hold him. They had to let him walk away. Weeks passed. Each new search brought the same result. Nothing. No second crime scene, no body, No car, no ransom, no clue. Detectives chased down dozens of tips. Someone claimed to have seen a silver van at a gas station in Idaho. Another thought they saw Rebecca in a shopping center in Oregon. Each lead was checked. Each turned up false. The longer the silence lasted, the more the case slipped into uncertainty. Officers who had been working 18-hour days began to burn out. Helicopters were grounded to save costs. Dive teams were recalled. Volunteers returned to their lives, no longer able to devote time to a search that yielded nothing. By the end of January 2008, investigators faced a grim reality. They had exhausted every immediate lead. There were no signs of accident, no signs of foul play that could be proven, and no indication of where the family had gone. Despite the largest mobilization of resources Chelan County had ever seen, the Parkers had simply vanished. On February 1st, the sheriff's office announced that the search would scale back. A small team of detectives would remain assigned, but the massive, daily manhunt was over. The case would officially move into cold case status. The announcement stunned the community. People who had gathered for weeks to hold vigils now expressed anger and disbelief. How could a family disappear when helicopters, divers, dogs, and hundreds of officers had searched? How could nothing be found? Parents clutched their... Inside the minivan, investigators made a grim discovery. The remains of 5 people, seated in positions consistent with Daniel driving, Rebecca in the passenger seat, and the triplets in the back. Clothing fragments still clung to the bones. Shoes, pieces of coats, and even a child's small toy wedged under one of the seats, preserved in the silt. But what shocked investigators most wasn't the recovery of the remains. It was what the forensic team found next. The Parkers had not drowned in an accident. They had been executed. Each of the 5 victims bore evidence of gunshot wounds to the skull. Daniel, Rebecca, and each of the triplets had been shot at close range. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle, no evidence that they had been alive when the car entered the lake. The conclusion was unavoidable. They were killed first, then placed in the van, which was deliberately driven or pushed into the water. This revelation shattered every old theory. For years, investigators had debated whether the Parkers had crashed, run away, or been kidnapped. Now the truth was clear. They had been murdered. Among the recovered evidence was a single bullet lodged under the back seat. Ballistics testing was performed using advanced technology not available in 2007. The rifling patterns were sharp, and when matched against firearm registries, the bullet linked directly to a .38 caliber revolver registered to Mark Hollis. For detectives, this was the breakthrough they had been waiting 13 years for. Hollis had been the obvious suspect from the beginning. Daniel Parker owed him $40,000, and Hollis had been heard threatening the family on multiple occasions. But until now, the case against him was circumstantial. They had suspicion, but no hard proof. With this bullet, that changed. The forensic team dug deeper. Advances in DNA technology allowed them to extract microscopic biological material from the inside of the minivan. All these details painted the same picture. The Parkers had not died by chance. They had been targeted, attacked, and executed. When news broke of the discovery, it swept across Washington state and then the entire nation. Newspapers ran front-page headlines: "Missing triplets found after 13 years," and "The Parker mystery finally solved." Television stations replayed the haunting footage of the minivan being lifted from the lake. Social media exploded with outrage and grief. For many, it was like reopening an old wound. The Parkers had been mourned, but never truly laid to rest. Now the confirmation of murder added a new layer of horror. The image of 3 6-year-old children executed in cold blood sent shockwaves across the country. The reopening of the case also reignited anger at how it had been handled in 2007. Why hadn't divers searched this spot more thoroughly back then? Why had so much time been wasted chasing theories of voluntary disappearance or abduction? Families of other missing persons cases demanded answers, fearful that their loved ones too might be lying undiscovered at the bottom of lakes and rivers. The sheriff's office and the FBI, under immense pressure, immediately reopened the investigation into Mark Hollis. Detectives retraced his movements from December 2007. They examined old phone records with modern technology, revealing gaps in his timeline the night the Parkers vanished. Hollis had claimed he was home all night, but tower data now suggested his cell phone had pinged briefly near Chelan before shutting off, a detail missed in the original investigation. Neighbors again came forward, repeating what they had said 13 years earlier. Hollis had raged outside the Parker home in the weeks before their disappearance. He had demanded his money back, yelling threats that were ignored at the time but now sounded chilling. "I'll take what's mine one way or another," he was heard saying. Prosecutors felt the evidence was, but before the trial could begin, the discovery of the minivan had already transformed the case in the public's mind. It was no longer a haunting mystery. It was now a brutal mass killing, concealed for over a decade. Forensic experts testified that the execution-style wounds left no doubt of intent. This wasn't a panicked act. This was premeditated murder. The van had been hidden with precision, pushed into one of the deepest, murkiest sections of Lake Chelan, almost ensuring it would never be found. Only the advancement of sonar technology and sheer luck had brought it back to the surface. The Parker case became a national story once again, a reminder of both the limits and the persistence of criminal investigation. For the Parker family's relatives, it was a bittersweet moment. They finally had answers, but the answers were darker than anyone could have imagined. As prosecutors prepared for trial, they released one simple statement to the press. "This is no longer the story of a missing family. This is the story of a murdered family." The transformation was complete. The missing triplets case had become one of the most notorious murder cases in Washington state history. In January 2021, the silence around the Parker case finally broke. 13 years after the family vanished, police moved in on a modest house in Spokane. Inside lived Mark Hollis, the man long whispered about as the shadow behind the disappearance. That night, FBI agents and local officers surrounded his home. They knocked, announced the warrant, and within minutes Hollis was in handcuffs. Neighbors watched from their windows, stunned. They saw him being led out, head down, wrists bound, flanked by armed officers. One neighbor later told reporters, "We always knew he had a temper, but to think he could do that?" It's shocking Hollis didn't resist. He didn't shout. He only said 6 words as he was placed in the back of a police car. "I didn't do anything at all." For the first time in over a decade, the Parker case had a clear suspect. The media exploded with headlines. "The long-awaited arrest." News crews flooded Spokane. The following morning, front pages across Washington carried the same image: Mark Hollis in cuffs, being escorted through the snow. That night, the surviving relatives of Daniel and Rebecca Parker received the call. Hollis was under arrest. Tears broke out. For years, they had attended vigils, pleaded for justice, watched the case go cold. Now, they finally felt hope. The trial of Mark Hollis was not just another criminal proceeding. It was the culmination of 13 years of unanswered questions. Prosecutors charged him with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 5 lives taken, 1 family erased. If convicted, Hollis faced life in prison without parole. Before the trial even began, his defense team started their strategy. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct witness placing Hollis at the scene, no video showing him with a gun, no confession. First came the bullet. It was found lodged under the back seat of the Parker minivan, rusted but intact. Ballistic experts testified that its striations matched a handgun registered to Hollis. The jury saw photographs of the weapon and the bullet side by side. Second came DNA. Forensic scientists testified that faint traces of Hollis's genetic material were found on the steering wheel and inside the door frame. Contamination was ruled out. The experts said clearly, these were Hollis's markers, preserved despite the years underwater. Third came the timeline. At 9:30 p.m., the Parker minivan was captured on a traffic camera entering the road along Lake Chelan. At that same time, Hollis could not prove his whereabouts. His alibi that he was at home was unsupported. No one saw him. No one could confirm his story. Then came testimony from neighbors who had overheard arguments. They remembered Hollis shouting at Daniel Parker, "I'll get my money back one way or another." These threats had been ignored 13 years earlier. Now, in front of a jury, they sounded chilling. A restaurant employee testified that he had seen a man resembling Hollis watching the Parker family at the resort the night they disappeared. He remembered the man's stare, fixed and hostile. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now the memory was damning. Financial records were also presented. Daniel owed Hollis exactly $40,000. This was not speculation. The debt was documented. Prosecutors argued that this debt was motive enough for murder. Finally, cell phone records showed Hollis's device pinging near Lake Chelan on the night of December 22, 2007. He had denied being anywhere near the area. The data contradicted him. The prosecutor summed it up. This was no accident. This was no random tragedy. This was an execution. The defense fought back. They reminded the jury that no one had seen Hollis pull a trigger. No cameras recorded the act. The minivan had sat underwater for over a decade. Evidence could have been contaminated. DNA could have been mixed. Bullets could have been switched. They painted Hollis as a victim of circumstance, a man with a temper, but not a killer. They suggested someone else, another enemy of Daniel Parker, could have carried out the crime. They argued that the case was built on emotion, not fact. But the prosecution responded firmly. They said coincidence cannot explain every link in the chain: the bullet, the DNA, the phone data, the threats, the financial motive, the eyewitness who saw him that night. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom atmosphere grew heavier each day. Seats filled quickly. Reporters lined the back wall. Locals traveled hours just to watch history unfold. The most emotional moments came when prosecutors displayed photographs. The rusted minivan being pulled from the lake. The skeletal remains identified as the Parker family. The small children's clothing recovered from inside. Gasps echoed through the room. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. The defense objected repeatedly, saying these images were intended to inflame emotions. The judge allowed them, stating they were part of the evidence. Every time the triplets were mentioned, silence swept the room. The idea of 3 6-year-olds being executed was unbearable. It was not just a murder trial. It was a collective grief being relived. Hollis sat expressionless throughout. He never broke down, never raised his voice, never showed remorse. To the public, his stillness was not stoicism. It was indifference. One journalist wrote, "The courtroom was heavy with silence, as if the weight of 13 years pressed down on everyone present." Closing arguments came at last. The prosecution spoke first. They looked directly at the jury and declared, "Mark Hollis didn't just kill Daniel Parker. He killed Rebecca. He killed Sophie. He killed Ethan. He killed Lucas. He slaughtered a family, all for money. He left their bodies under water, hoping the lake would keep his secret. But the truth surfaced. Science does not lie, and neither should you. There is only one just verdict." They reminded the jury that all 3 children had been shot in the head. They reminded them that Hollis had threatened to recover his debt by any means necessary. They concluded with the words, "This was deliberate. This was execution. And the only proper verdict is guilty." The defense countered with desperation. They insisted that reasonable doubt remained. They argued that nobody had actually seen Hollis commit the crime. They begged the jury not to convict a man solely because of anger and grief. But the room knew the weight of the evidence. The defense sounded thin compared to the mountain of facts laid out. The jury left to deliberate. Outside, cameras captured the anxious faces of reporters and families. Headlines declared, "Washington holds its breath." 2 days later, the jury returned. The foreman stood. The courtroom held its breath. On all 5 counts of first-degree murder, the verdict was the same: guilty. Hollis lowered his head. He showed no visible reaction. Inside the courtroom, sobs broke out. The surviving relatives of the Parkers cried openly. Outside, crowds cheered and shouted, "Justice for the Parkers!" The judge read the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hollis would never walk free again. That night, the headlines blared, "After 13 years, justice finally delivered." The trial of Mark Hollis closed one of Washington's darkest chapters. It was not just a conviction. It was a reckoning. For years, 13 years of doubt ended with a single word: guilty. The Parker case closed in law. It did not close in memory. What followed was not silence. It was action, change, and a record of what went wrong and what finally went right. The first step was formal. The coroner issued amended death certificates for Daniel, Rebecca, and the triplets. Cause of death: homicide by firearm. The sheriff's office updated the case status from missing persons to closed, homicide solved. The FBI archived the Joint Task Force files. A timeline that had stopped on December 22, 2007, finally had a last entry. October 2021. Conviction. The second step was practical. The families needed their dead back. The medical examiner released the remains after final documentation. The Parkers were buried together in a single service in Seattle. 5 caskets, 1 long line of patrol cars, a folded flag. Names read one by one. No speculation, no speeches about theories, only facts and finality. In the weeks after sentencing, the state reviewed the investigation from 2007, not to pass blame, to document gaps. The report cited 3 points. Lake search protocols in 2007 relied on limited technology and short windows of diver time. Camera coverage on rural roads was sparse, and retention periods were short. Cold cases lacked dedicated funding and centralized technical support. Each point produced a change. First, the Department of Natural Resources, the State Patrol, and local sheriffs agreed on a standing lake and river search protocol. Sonar mapping would become a default tool when a vehicle and a body might be involved, not as a last resort, as an early step. The protocol set a simple sequence: define likely entry points, grid the water, log every anomaly, and return until each anomaly is cleared. The plan was written in plain language so small For the families, change looked different. They had answers. They wanted accountability to last. The Parkers' relatives started a small foundation in the triplets' names. Its work was specific. It paid for sonar time in rural missing person cases that involved a suspected vehicle. It mailed checklists to small departments, one-page, double-sided, covering evidence preservation at suspected water entry sites, how to mark tire scuffs, how to request regional sonar support, how to escalate when local resources are exhausted. No slogans, only steps. At the church where the Parkers had once volunteered, a brass plaque went up near the entrance. 5 lines, 5 names, 1 date. Below the names, a shorter line: found, not forgotten. The congregation used it the way communities use mile markers, a place to orient, a measure of distance from what happened. On the law enforcement side, the sheriff's office changed its intake script for disappearances. Dispatchers learned to ask a set of 3 questions when a family vanishes with a vehicle at night. What was the last road? Was there water nearby? Are there hills or cliffs near that road? If yes to any, a supervisor could activate a sonar consult within hours. The script was tested in the first year. It produced 2 quick water recoveries unrelated to the Parkers. In both, the families got answers inside a week, not after a decade. Forensic standards shifted with the case as well. The lab that processed the Parker evidence published its workflow for extracting degraded DNA from submerged vehicles. The method emphasized enzyme treatments, micro-swabbing of cabin fixtures, and strict separation of samples to prevent cross-transfer. Other labs adopted parts of it. The goal wasn't a headline, it was reproducibility. Ballistics got a similar update. The state added a training module on how to handle bullets recovered from submerged. As for Hollis, his life narrowed to a system of counts and checks: intake, classification, movement under escort. 1 phone call at a time, 1 hour of yard, 1 tray. He filed an appeal in 2022. He argued that the DNA should have been excluded, that the ballistics were overstated, that prior threats should not have been admitted. The appellate court affirmed the conviction. The opinion set out the evidence chain in clean paragraphs: the bullet, the DNA, the phone ping, the threats, the financial motive, the lake, the timeline. It concluded that the jury had been properly instructed and the verdict was supported. Hollis remained where the sentence put him: life without parole. The resort that served the Parkers their last dinner changed, too. Management added cameras at the exit and extended footage retention. Staff training included a short section on suspicious behavior reporting. Not paranoia, pattern recognition. If someone tails a family from table to parking lot, note the plate, call it in. They also set up a shuttle service on fog nights so guests didn't have to drive the narrow lakeside road, tired and after dark. The county road crew installed new guardrails on the tightest curves along the lake. The state funded fog sensors that trigger flashing low visibility signs when conditions drop. The signs are not tributes, they are tools that prevent late-night guesswork on slick pavement. The press drew larger circles. Editorials used the Parker case to argue for stronger interagency data sharing and longer camera retention in rural zones. Some pushed for statewide sonar mapping of high-risk lakes. Others focused on cold case transparency, posting case timelines, evidence statuses, and lab backlogs in public dashboards. A few counties tried dashboards. Citizens saw what was pending and what had moved. Calls to do something turned into lists of what needed funding and what had been funded. Law enforcement schools used the Parker timeline. First, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A clean road, no skid marks, no debris. None of that meant the family drove away or staged a disappearance. It meant the search needed to include the water and the woods with the right tools. Second, technology moves. A case that looks empty in one decade can yield proof in the next. Sonar mapping improved. DNA extraction improved. Cell site analysis improved. The same set of facts produced different results because the tools changed. That is not failure. That is progress applied late. Third, motive does not have to be complex to be lethal. A $40,000 debt, repeated threats, an escalation on a foggy night. The simplest motive in the file was the motive that matched the evidence. The families who had lived under a cloud for 13 years gained something concrete. A place to visit, a verdict to read, a timeline that made sense from start to finish. They did not use big words for it. They used small ones. Found, proved, buried. For investigators, the lesson was equally plain. When a family disappears with a vehicle near water, treat the water as part of the scene. Grid it, clear it, document it. Do it early. Do it again if necessary. The 2020 discovery happened because a citizen with sonar looked where the initial search did not. The new protocol tries to ensure the next search is official, early, and thorough. For prosecutors, the case became a model for building an outcome on converging lines of proof. One bullet, one partial DNA profile, one cell ping, one witness who saw a stare across a dining room, one neighbor who heard a threat. Each piece small, together decisive. For the broader public, the change was quieter. People adjusted habits on winter roads. Communities formalized help when money disputes turned ugly. Schools added a unit on digital footprints and location data to civics classes. What your phone can show, what it cannot. How long carriers keep records. Why truth in an alibi now includes towers and timestamps. The case remains in training binders, policy memos, and footnotes in appellate decisions. It remains in a plaque on a church wall and a line in a foundation's charter. It remains in improved guardrails, longer camera retention, and sonar kits loaded onto county trucks. It remains as a reminder that details matter, that small decisions compound, and that a clean road can hide a crime that sits in the dark until someone brings up the evidence. In the end, the Parker timeline is simple enough to recite. A family leaves dinner at 9:10 p.m., passes a camera at 9:30, disappears into fog, is found in 2020, and is named in a verdict in 2021. The simplicity is not comfort. It is clarity. It is the difference between rumor and record. The record says the state did not forget. The record says a murderer did not keep his secret. The record says the triplets had names, and the law wrote them down in the right place. The last scene is not a courtroom. It is a checklist. It is a diver's boat with a sonar screen. It is a dispatcher asking the 3 questions. It is a detective signing a lab request with a budget line to pay for it. It is a highway sign flashing low visibility. It is a foundation covering a search bill, so a family does not wait 13 years. The Parker case is closed. The work it started is not. If this story gripped you, don't let it be the last one. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next case we uncover. Every week, we bring you real investigations, haunting cold cases, and shocking courtroom battles. The Parker family's tragedy shows how long justice can take, and there are many more stories waiting to be told. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join us as we continue digging into the mysteries that demand answers.